So this part of our morning's proceedings is officially billed as an encouragement talk. And in such a talk, you can remain in Zazen, or if you prefer, you can open your eyes and listen that way. And I am sitting in under the vast spell of very heavy rain weather here. If I suddenly cut out because of an electricity failure, I do have my phone, trusty little phone, ready here to go onto a hotspot as needed. But there may be a glitch in the proceedings. Mind you, what is there that is not in the proceedings of our lives? Glitch after glitch after glitch, or as Dogen put it, one continuous mistake. Mistake, miracle, no one can really tell the difference there. So we're sitting here together once more, apart and together, online, in what may be, I deeply hope will be, a year of transition back to more face-to-face contact. And it's interesting that we're almost accustomed to this strange and yet very generous offer from technology, which is not always so generous, is not always so benevolent. But in this case, it has offered a gift that this pandemic could not have done without. And I don't know if you can see it, but I'm actually sitting in one of my two rakusus, and if you can, I'm holding it up to the camera. And if you look closely, perhaps you can see there's a woman sitting there. She's riding on a turtle, and she is in fact Manjushri, as rendered by Mayumi Oda, a wonderful Japanese artist. As a gift to me, she painted my rakusu. So Manjushri, as a woman, is riding on a sea turtle, a green sea turtle, across the vast waters of emptiness. And she's holding up what actually, when you look at Mayumi's rendition, rather than being Manjushri's sword, looks awfully like a shifting spanner. I think that's very valuable, a shifting spanner. I recommend every woman to get a shifting spanner. We need them at the moment. And the reason why I'm wearing my particularly feminine version of the rakusu is because, and in honor of, two things. One is the Women's March for Justice, of which I was part. And the other is on behalf of my teacher, John Tarrant, who gave me this rakusu. And I want to begin in this exploration of speaking about not knowing. You know, we're sitting here in the midst of a vast known unknown about pandemic, about the state of the earth, the state of human hearts and how they hold each other or fail to. And we're sitting here with this health issues right now for the whole earth, and also for individual people, including my teacher, John Tarrant, who's dealing with serious health issues right now. And I want to quote his words to begin with, which go as follows. I think we've gone beyond the idea of what a strange time and how things should be or might return somewhere. Things are as they are, and our task is to encourage and especially to enjoy each other in such circumstances, to enjoy the difficulty. This is the way we look after the universe, by joining it, by being in it deeply, completely. Robert Aitken learned koans and haiku from R.H. Blythe, translator and writer. They were interned together in a Japanese prison camp, I think for about 3 years. And their questions, their questions were urgent. Robert Aiken was puzzled by the Zen vow to awaken everyone. How do you save all beings? He asked. You save all beings by including them, Mr. Blythe said. John goes on, we meditate in order to find the path through the narrow strait, to express, to feel the time we are in. And within that, the true nature of life. And we share that. We do our best. We are occupying these vast human lives that contain worlds upon worlds and which might disappear at any moment. Any one of us can disappear at any moment. Our task is to live and do what we can and pass it on. So you save all beings by including them, said R.H. Blythe, the author of a book on my bookshelf here, which is Zen and English Literature. A wonderful book that influenced me as a teenager very deeply. So this including is actually the action of not knowing, which is this theme today. Not knowing is most intimate. So strangely enough, the secret of doing what we can, as John put it, is not simply a matter of being well informed and thoughtful. It is a matter of becoming skilled in not knowing. Not knowing. Not knowing is a move in the direction of harmonizing, not opposing, not dividing, not fault finding. But it's coming from a very strong place, not a place of I don't know what to say or do. It's coming from the strong place called a true person of no rank. A very humble, very open, very shared kind of person or sense of being. That phrase, by the way, comes from Lin Ji, the true person of no rank. John is actually describing in those words the activity of not knowing. It's not just a kind of a practice or something to cultivate, to explore, to begin to realize. It is also an activity. So what's inside it? Including, of course, the heart, mind of including. Ruling and pushing nothing out or away. Holding contentious looking opposites, including. Holding them in one mind, and that's a non-judging mind. And that is a great skill, not easy. Endlessly easy to keep learning, however. So many opportunities. Non-judging, generous, and with access to what comes not from straight ahead where you expect to find it, where in fact you anticipate finding it, where you know you will or should find it. All of that is put aside in not knowing, because this access, you could almost say, to the same source of creativity that is endlessly bringing forth this universe. That comes to the human mind from round the corner. Think of the infinite number of, well, however many koan cases you have ever heard spoken about, and how much the koan point, the turning word, the turning question, the implicit question in the turning word comes from around the corner. For example, Many of you know about the two monks down at the creek with their bowls, frog in front of them, two birds fly down, tear the frog apart in front of them. The young monk cries out, "Why does it come to this?" And Shan says, "It is only for your benefit, Acharya. Only for your benefit, honored one, the one awake inside you. That's what is being addressed. It is only for your benefit." There's an example of coming from around the corner. And I'm reminded in this matter of the implicit wisdom in so much indigenous law and LORE, deep understanding drawn from tens of thousands of generations of living and becoming deeply co-creative with this very habitat we call the continent of Australia. And that is that injunction that is usually there, and I hope you can hear me over the gathering rain. It could get very loud. That is coming from that deep wisdom of when you're approaching a sacred place, you must approach from the side. You sit down and wait to be invited in. You are open at all times on the edge called either respect on one side and expect the unexpected on the other. This is implicit and even explicit in so much Indigenous Australian philosophy, thought, wisdom. And notice that this orientation of approach from the side, be approached from the side, not from where you're looking straight ahead with your goal-directed eyes, but open-bodied, open-pawed in all directions, picking up the entire field, live field of what is happening. Becoming skilled in this. Notice that this whole orientation is free of supposing something, free of expectation. It's actually much more like a companioning, a befriending of what is happening. Being not just with it, but in it, boots and all. Choosing exactly what is. Beginning always from that unshrinking closeness. And that closeness is gathered up in the word intimacy, which you hear a lot about. You hear it often in Zen talks, intimacy. Intimacy and not knowing, you cannot take them apart. Here, the fact that not knowing is an action, an ongoing, present, continuous action of the mind and heart. And here that intimacy means closeness of knowing, in fact, closeness of being, closeness of knowing that does not have self and other in play. That close. So the source and the activity of intimacy is not knowing. So not knowing is including, it is dropping self, it's dropping choice, so-called choice. It is touching emptiness, seeing clearly, and it is embodied in the fact and the act and the deep art form we call shikantaza, just sitting, just being, adding nothing to that. Refusing nothing, adding nothing. Choiceless awareness, this is always a choice. It in fact is to choose choiceless awareness, that's the one choice that is hard to remember. And so that's why practice is like the thread tied around one finger, always with us, always nudging awareness. There's something else that can be offered here, choiceless awareness. Not the reaction, not the immediate, often discounting either of self or other kind of reaction. Nothing is discounted in choiceless awareness. It is deep including, based in dropping the self, dropping choice, and beginning to touch emptiness and draw from that deep old well from which everything that you can possibly ever encounter, do, say, think, realize, touch, has flowed endlessly. Emptiness. There's a 13th century Japanese master, Daito Kokushi. He wrote these words on Zen. It's a lovely way of understanding this touching emptiness. He said, there is a reality even prior to heaven and earth. Indeed, it has no form, much less a name. Eyes fail to see it. It has no voice for ears to detect. To call it mind or Buddha violates its nature. But then it becomes like a visionary flower in the air. It is not a visionary flower in the air. It is not mind nor Buddha. Absolutely quiet, and yet illuminating in a mysterious way. It allows itself to be perceived only by the clear-eyed. It is Dharma, truly beyond form and sound. It is Tao, having nothing to do with words. So he is describing the self-nature that is essentially empty and vastly inclusive. He's touching self-nature and saying that it is at once intrinsic to not just you, not just me, not just all beings, but every particle of matter as well, which, who can say, alive or not alive from that place? Intrinsic, primordial, groundless, and boundless, and inconceivable. You cannot approach it with concepts. But he's also saying in those words that it is experiential, and that experientially it is simply what each of us is able to realize in this life. How intimate we can grow within its presence and towards it, and therefore towards all the many beings, open on all sides. So it is intrinsic, primordial, groundless, boundless, inconceivable, and it is experiential. And at that experiential level, simply and humbly, what each of us is able to realize in this life. So intimacy is exactly this tender, human, and endlessly opening matter. Shikantaza is like this. Do you see that it is open? Its very nature is openness. It's constant source that constantly flows through any true sitting in Shikantaza. That constant source has no edges. It offers no implacable oppositions to anything. It has no outside to it. You know, we talk about inside becoming outside, but Shikantaza continually realizes or faces in the direction of realizing there is no outside here. We have this matter already, this self-nature. We have everything, but we don't dare believe that very often. And we don't readily experience that. Hence practice, hence this thread tied round one finger, always nudging awareness. So there's very much inside this mind of not knowing, there is that powerful sense in Daito Kokushi's words of exhausting, the sense of exhausting words, emptying thoughts. Like those dissolving clouds. They're not dissolving here at the moment, they're just banking up endlessly. But when you have a cloud in an otherwise empty sky and you can watch it dissolve within about 12 minutes, that's about the life of a cloud. Left to their own devices, they freely form and dissolve. Thoughts just like that in shikantaza, empty of content to which you might cling. There's no clinging to. Everything is allowed to be. It's being itself, let back into the present. Our being, let back into the present and the fullness of the present. And yeah, coming to be acquainted with what's already so abundantly present and flowing through us just as we are flowing through it, flowing together. It's like the kind of mind that refuses, doesn't quite agree to be right where we are, becomes not currently available. That's actually a formal military classification during the Vietnam War for people who refused to be conscripted and had reason after reason, probably fallen archers in one particular case, whose name we won't mention. But ultimately, when all of those attempts by the military to get somebody back under its grip, you could read there the mind trying to get you back under its grip. There was a formal classification, I believe it was 1H, which meant, just simply had those words, not currently available. You could think of that as your shikantaza koan, not currently available to the small mind, but open, radically open. Not currently available for drafting some kind of important self who must be in front of all things. So this is a modest, but it's also a powerful, clear-eyed place. That's the true person of no rank. I don't think there are any great teachings on earth that fail or could ever possibly fail. To point to the koan of the self, they might not call it that. They might call it the problem of the self. But in every case, the barrier is I, separate from everything that is deemed to be not I, which is a little bit like saying, I agree to live confined in the suffocatingly small space of my own skull. So this move of not knowing, it is a very subtle matter, but at every point it is the self growing more transparent, a little more permeable, more able to see through the self-made walls of the self, and not knowing, inverted commas, not knowing self to be in front of anything at all, nothing at all. Think of Dogen's words, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To let that sense, that ever-present sense of self, fall away, drop away. Body and mind drop away, as he put it. And then, of course, we can be enlightened by the 10,000 things, the infinite flow, whatever you wish to call this mystery we're in. And above all, as a human being, this matter of intimacy, we are tasting at last being this moment, body, breath, and mind. Being this moment. That's the essence of Shikantaza, not knowing self. And it's a very alive matter when it's not confined in any possible way. Shikantaza is not a confined activity. And so when Jaja was asked, what is meditation? He said, it's not meditation. Why isn't it meditation? It's alive, he said. The mind of not knowing is alive. And it's alive there in those words, it's not meditation, not clinging to a single, what do you call it, beautiful flower in the air of any kind. And above all, it's in those words, it's alive. Not knowing is the most alive possibility for a human heart and mind. Not knowing is not rejecting anything, it is including, it is essentially that mind of both and it is founded in I don't know. I don't impose my knowing. I don't impose myself. No more than any tree imposes itself, imposes its extraordinary form of knowing. No more than the floor imposes that upon us, no more than a bird call does. So not knowing is becoming clear-eyed, becoming undone, unmade, offering no barrier. Any reason to distinguish this from the word love? The intimacy of the word love and the state of not knowing. It's a very, very deep intimacy. So this great case, the great case about intimacy is, there are two, at least two, probably 2,000, but the one that everybody knows deeply is case 20 of the Book of Equanimity, known as Dijang's Most Intimate. And here's how it goes. Dijang, a student, a teacher, asked Fayan, when Fayan, who became a great teacher, was at that point a student. Dijang asked Fayan, where are you going? Fayan said, I am wandering at random. Dijang said, what do you think of wandering? Fayan said, I don't know. Dijang said, not knowing is most intimate. And Fayan was suddenly enlightened. So Dijang throws out a live line or wire to Fayan. He asks, where are you going? Where are you going? And why are you here? It is, in a way, the same question. This mystery, have you noticed it's a mystery? A wonderful, well, at least wondrous mystery. So Fayan says, I am wandering at random. He might be referring to the fact that he is on pilgrimage. But we begin to hear something almost like the light levels falling throughout this encounter. Darkening, darkening, darkening. Because Fayan says, I'm wandering at random. There's a beautiful moment that Robert Aiken used to speak of when he was a student, and there was a very elderly man at one of the sessions in Hawaii. I think it was probably a session run by Yamada Roshi. And there was a moment when Robert Aiken and the old man were sitting on a seat in that breakfast break moment in session. And the sun began to simply rise up out of the Pacific Ocean, as it does. Or as the Pacific Ocean tilts down into the sun, as it does, and the sun comes up. And the old man just sort of pointed in wonder, and he said, "Oh," "Oh, look, the sun." Nobody can have the presence of mind to say, I think you should go see the teacher soon. You should go to Doksan. He could see this rich, fruitful darkening, the not knowing growing in this old man. Fertile, not knowing. Well, similarly, Dijon saw that moment in a way, and he said, what do you think of wandering? You know, do you have any mind left that's trying to kind of toy with this? Find something wonderful for yourself? Or what's going on here? He twitches that line he'd thrown. And Fayan said, and could only say, we suspect, I don't know. How wonderful that I don't know can be. How wide, how tender, how available it can be. Dijon takes advantage of that availability immediately. Not knowing is most intimate, he says. Very ripe moment. And Fayan was suddenly enlightened. The fruit falls at that moment. There's an exquisite sense in this case of the dusk, almost like enlightenment as a kind of dusk, deepening throughout. Not dawn breaking so much as night finally having a chance to fall. The mind's finally having a chance to have no walls up at all, no barriers. And there's great freedom in this not knowing. The verse attached to this case in the Blue Cliff Record, in the Book of Equanimity, mentions these words. It says, the abundance or scarcity of the house, and of the house you can understand there of the mind of the one who is in interaction with the teacher, is used according to the occasion. Roaming serenely in the land, he goes where his feet take him. That's actually a perfectly fine epitaph for a life dedicated to the generosity and the willingness and the openness and the usefulness of not knowing. Roaming serenely in the land, he went where his feet took him. Can you hear the freedom in that? Can you hear there was a great talk of liberation and unboundedness and so on in Buddhist talk. But to go where your feet take you, and to really be where your feet take you, there it is. The other case that touches this matter deeply would be very familiar to most of you, and that's the encounter between Emperor Wu and Bodhidharma. It looks like being an exploration at the outset of the question of dana, of generosity, because Emperor Wu, who has called Bodhidharma in front of him, he'd heard about this rather crazed individual who had arrived in town, and he summoned him. He'd heard that he was very interesting in some way. He summoned him before him. And Emperor Wu, having been a very generous supporter of Buddhism, having given a lot of the funds of the empire across to Buddhism, and more than that, he'd actually been a practitioner, a serious, genuine, devoted kind of human being. He probably would have preferred to be a monk than to be emperor, although emperors can probably never finally sort that out, given the drug of power. However, at this moment, he's very open, believes he is, and he asks a kind of Dorothy Dix kind of question of Bodhidharma, and he asks him, what is the first principle of the holy teaching? Knowing, there's a lot of knowing in that word knowing, that the first principle of the holy teaching is dana, is generosity. The fact that the gift flows through all of us all the time, and we don't dam it up inside us. We let it overflow with generosity to others, to all. So he knew that and had been practicing that diligently. But Bodhidharma says in reply to that question, vast emptiness, nothing holy. What a serve. What a wonderful offer those words are. Vast emptiness. Nothing that can be corralled into a little human special place called holy. Nothing as small as that. And that is a holy fact. So very surprised and probably disturbed, Emperor Wu says, who are you sitting in front of me? And everybody here, almost without exception, knows how he replied. What kind of reply is it when Bodhidharma says, I don't know? Can you hear decades of a kind of fierce love in those words? A fierce love that doesn't have an object, subject, set of preferences. It does not hold this word I as an indissoluble fact. I is already dissolving into don't know in that very statement. Don't know looks back at I and can find nothing or very little right there. So that's where we're at. We're in this place of a kind of wondering about the world that is very deep in most human beings right now, in all sorts of different ways. And we have the possibility of falling into the sense of there is a known unknown ahead of us. What can we bring to meet it? It's not even ahead of us, it's already happening all the way through, and every one of us is part of it. Is there a difference? And if so, what is the productive difference between not being able to know and actively not knowing? This is what I've been exploring, and this is what I'd like us to explore when we take a break in a moment to have another walk. But to look at this fact that at the most practical level, the generosity and the discovery, look at the discovery in the move that is there from it is so to is it so? Let's look. Let's never stop looking. Let's hold in loving fashion this very being as open as possible. So the koans I would like us to take up and play with in the last part of this morning, after a break of walking, of kinhin and rain. The first is that I'd say the undying koan of every time you sit down to meditate, especially with that wholeness of shikantaza. Not knowing is most intimate. I'd like us to, it's like you, to let that reverberate through you and find what it discovers in your life, your experience, your experiential fact of not knowing is most intimate. Most intimate, the most intimate place you can stand your feet upon this earth, a place of not knowing. The second one is the power of those words, I don't know, the ability to offer a situation. It's almost like a deep bow. I don't know. When has that been productive for you? When has that rippled through you, not as a kind of failure or an embarrassment, but as a kind of deep relief in which you can suddenly flow more freely into the space of where you are and discover so much more than your little knowing could ever have touched. The humility in that, the humbleness, the earthiness, the humor, they all come back to that root word of human. That human comes from the same root as humor, humus, the earth, and humble. And finally, underlying both of these are the words of another case altogether. I don't think who it was. It was Guishan speaking to Yangshan. And in an interaction there, both of them look into the phrase or the statement, there is no base to rely on. And they discovered in there is no base to rely on. They discovered the fullness of being and all that you can ever offer, all that you can ever let flow through your life to save the many beings, to include the many beings. Okay, we'll leave it there. I will leave it there and let us come back and see what collective wisdom lies in this moment together. So if we can possibly have another period of shikantaza before we come back.